All right, welcome to another episode of Medicine Mondays. I am yours truly, Dr. Barry Pierre, your favorite board certified internist, host of Medicine Mondays, as well as The Real Physician Reacts. And this week, we're going to be talking about some news of an former NBA star, Tony Snell, and his fight to get on an NBA team. And you're probably wondering, Dr. Barry, why do we care about that here on your show? Well, this is why. It's actually going to be leading up until next week's episode with our special guest, Maria Davis Pierre, my wife, who is also the CEO of Autism in Black. So if you did not know, Tony Snell last year was on, I want to say, Good Morning America, one of those morning shows, where he learned that his son was autistic. And in learning his son was autistic and kind of going through the motions and the processes, he was like, you know what? I might be autistic as well. And subsequently, he was actually diagnosed of being autistic himself as an adult, which is, if you follow my wife's story, Maria Davis Pierre, it's not out of the ordinary. In fact, that's exactly how my wife was diagnosed with her autism. Like not necessarily during the process of getting our kids diagnosed, but just in the process of kind of doing her kind of daily things while taking care of our child with autism. So this week, I guess, like in the NBA, you need to have a certain number of years to qualify to be on a retirement plan. And there's been pleads out there to say, hey, you know what, get this man on a team, even if for one day, because apparently you only need to be on the team one day so he become vested for the retirement plan. And why is that important? Because you have an NBA player who recognizes the need of services associated with autism and says, you know what, the cost to do so, and I want to say because he has two sons, but the cost to do so will be too great if he's not put on the retirement plan, right? And again, this is not necessarily a discussion on financial planning and anything else, but this is a discussion on, here you have a father whose child has autism, who is actually autistic himself, and he's recognizing the burden of taking care of that child and all the services provided. So it just really brought me back down to memory lane. And I'm not sure or familiar if too many people, especially on this platform, know my story, right? So again, I am a father of three amazing children, husband of, an amazing person, Maria Davis Pierre, and who, if you listen to the podcast, she actually does the introduction, right? So you'll hear that familiar voice, especially for next week's episode. But here I am as a father, taking care of two children who are on the autism spectrum, as well as a husband, for my wife who is on the autism spectrum as well. And it just brought back so many memories because I'm like, oh, I remember the first time our daughter was officially diagnosed. And I remember the first time having to run into hurdle after hurdle, even before the diagnosis. Like my wife tells the story much better than me. But I remember even in our privileged position as being as a physician, privileged position as being as therapist that my wife was at the time, it was still difficult for us to go through all of the obstacles needed just to get to diagnosis. And you may be wondering, like, Dr. Barry, like, why is it so important just to get to diagnosis? Because unfortunately, especially in this country here, you don't even qualify for any of the services until that diagnosis occur. So my wife had to go through, and I do say my wife because I was there, but like I was in the background. But my wife had to go through a lot of hoops just to get that diagnosis for our daughter. Because when you talk to the autistic community, they'll tell you that early intervention is so important. So time delay is not an option, especially for my wife. It was not an option. And fortunately, we were able to get the diagnosis, but then that was just the start of the book. Like how many of us, think like, once I got the diagnosis, everything is good to go. No, unfortunately, that was not the case. So once we get the diagnosis, now we have to go through the processes of finding out, hey, what services are not only out there for us, but what services are we going to be eligible for? I know in our case, and I'll speak specifically on our case, where I had to learn as a physician that if I broke a bone, my insurance had no problem paying for me for physical therapy, occupational therapy, like if it's like all the therapies I needed, right? Like if I had a stroke, they'd have no problem paying for speech therapy. But if I'm diagnosed with autism, all of a sudden there are no coverages for occupational therapy. There are no coverages for physical therapy. There are no coverages for speech therapy, even though like all of those services are still needed with that diagnosis. So it was very eye-opening to me to realize that, wow, even as a physician, even with the privileged position as my wife being the therapist, even that we were dealing with roadblocks on top of roadblocks on top of roadblocks. So when I see, this former NBA player recognize that, hey, you know what? Like, I need to get on this retirement plan, because if I don't get on a retirement plan, it's going to be difficult to be able to take care of my family, especially with the diagnosis. And I want people to kind of understand that. I want people to kind of recognize, if it's difficult for a physician and a therapist to get the diagnosis, if it's difficult for a physician and a therapist to get the services, if it's difficult for us to do that, and now it's difficult. Now you see a person who he was in the NBA, played multiple years for the NBA. In fact, I think he played like 9 years, and you have to be in the NBA for 10 to qualify for the retirement. He played 9 years in the NBA. Just recently found out that his child was autistic, and even he recognizes, you know what, like, I need to do something, because like this may be a problem. And as a father, and this is really why I wanted to do this week's episode, especially leading up to next week's episode with our esteemed leader, CEO Autism at Black. It's interesting to know that even if you can see the resources, it almost hurts more knowing that those resources may be unattainable to those who can't jump over the obstacles that are there. And there are invincible obstacles, and there are like direct obstacles, right? Again, when we were looking for a speech therapist, when we were looking for an occupational therapist, when we were looking for a physical therapist, they were like physical barrier obstacles that we just could not access. And I'm in South Florida. And you think South Florida, lots of people here. To get the diagnosis, you need a certain specialty. And the amount of physicians who are actually, qualified to be able to give that diagnosis makes it so that you have significant wait times. Again, remember I talked about how time was so important. Significant wait times just to get to an appointment. And so think about that. There's significant wait times just to get to the appointment. And then when you get the appointment, you have all of these lab tests and all of these things that need to be done and checked off, just for the person to say, you know what, I think we need to wait a little bit. Like, it's kind of mind-boggling, but it's one of those things where, yes, I have a platform. I have a voice. I can speak it. My wife has a platform. She has a voice. She can speak it. Tony Snell has a platform. He can speak it. Like, to the point where, like, I saw Charles Barkley even campaigning for teams to go ahead and sign him for a date. Like, it won't shock me, especially by the time you guys get this recording. It won't shock me if he gets signed to a team just so he can qualify. It won't shock me one bit whatsoever, right? But that's what happens when you have privilege and access. But what about the people who don't? What about the people who don't have access to a physician? What about the people who don't have access to a therapist? What about the people who don't have access, to the NBA and former NBA players and current NBA players, screaming on rehab? What about those people? And I think that is what was our origin story when we started this organization, Autism in Black, because we recognize that there are a lot more people on the outside. There are a lot more people who don't have the resources, who don't have the connections, who don't have the things needed, but they still want to take care of their loved ones. Like, why should the fact that you don't have access, from a financial perspective or just from a networking perspective, why should the fact that you don't have that access preclude your kids to get the services that they need? Like, it's mind-boggling to say the least, but unfortunately, it's not surprising. Right, and we'll definitely talk a little bit more about it next week when I have Maria on. But it's not surprising to me that even someone of his stature could run into that, because I saw some comments. Right, I was seeing comments saying, "Well, he's an NBA player. He made all that money. I don't know how much money he made, but he made all that money. Like, what does he worry about services for?" And it just lets me know that people, one, don't recognize all of the services that are required, and more importantly, how expensive those services can be. Those services can be speech therapy can be very expensive. Physical therapy can be very expensive. Occupational therapy could be very expensive. That's not even including any additional school teaching or tutoring that may need to occur, just to try to, make sure your kid, stays, within running distance of people in their age class, right? Like these are real life decisions that parents are having to make on a daily basis. And of course, autism in Black, it is one of those things where when you put the lens of like this experience as a parent, and you happen to be a Black parent, like it becomes even more of a weight, even more of a burden, because the experience is definitely much different. We recognize that because of our children being Black, it's more likely that our diagnosis is going to come a little bit later. It's more likely that we're going to have less and less services. I talk about this all the time when I'm talking about certain diseases and say, hey, if you catch it early enough, there's more interventions. If you catch it early enough, there's more ways to survive that disease. Right? When I'm talking about like we talked about prostate cancer, like if you catch it early enough, there's ways to like help forecast a better future. So now when we talk about autism, if you catch it early enough and you have the interventions that are there, guess what? The outcomes at the end are going to be better. So imagine if a whole community who does not have financial access, who does not have the networking access, runs into these roadblocks and has to delay. Guess what? That outcome is not going to be as good as it would have been if you caught it sooner. Right? I'm hoping, especially for my Lunch and Learn community members, I'm hoping you can understand that. That's just simple. That's just a very simple way to explain it. So as a father, I see that story and I don't think, oh man, that's an NBA player. He should be fine. He doesn't need to be on retirement. But as a father of of autistic children and a husband of an autistic wife, I recognize like, wow, not only does he need to be on that retirement plan, like something needs to be done to make sure that another community behind him who is less fortunate doesn't also run into those same issues. Like that is the hat I put on when I see a similar situation like that occur, because that is the reality for a majority of people. Like we have our Autism in Black community and we have our conference, and I'm constantly talking to mothers and fathers, right, who have the same type of experiences, regardless of what part of the country they're in, the same type of roadblocks, regardless of what part of the country they're in. And it's in talking and in seeing others who are like you and also have that same experience, they're able to open their eyes and say, oh, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who is experiencing this. I'm not the only one who has to deal with the fact that, it's life's already hard. We can already tell you life is already hard. These obstacles just make it a little bit harder. So again, I commend the NBA players, the former and the current NBA players who are, championing and, trying to, get this guy, on their team for just a day, just one day, so you can qualify for that retirement, because the empathy that they're showing lets me know that it said, hey, you know what? I don't care about, your prior status as an NBA player. I recognize that if we don't help you, get to this level, right? Get to this retirement plan that allows you to have the benefits that are there, like it can be detrimental to your kids. Because I think about my daughter. I think about my daughter and how, in fact, she, it's so funny. We just went to an honor roll ceremony for her. She's in 6th grade right now. So just went to an honor roll ceremony for her. And my wife was like, oh, can you believe that, our daughter's on the honor roll, right? And of course, me, me being me, like, yeah, of course, because, I'm thinking like, yeah, she takes after her pops. Of course, she'll be on honor roll. But in her mind, I know what she's asking. I know what she's saying. She's saying in her mind, wow, like, I can't imagine, like, when we used to have to fight to try to get her tutoring. We used to have to fight to try to get her speech therapy and have to fight for all of those services. And people were telling us, just wait, just wait, just wait. Like, imagine if she didn't put up that type of fight, right? Imagine if she didn't say, you know what? I don't care what you're telling me right now. I'm going to get the services I need for my daughter. Like, imagine if she didn't do that. Like, is there an honor roll to go to? I don't know, right? So we are just gonna, again, obviously from as a father, and I don't even know my, like this. I'll just say, like, behind the scenes guy in Autism in Black. Obviously, we sent our wishes out to Tony Snell. I hope he gets on the team. I hope he gets on that retirement plan. I hope he gets the services not only for his children but possibly for himself as well, right? Because again, he's newly diagnosed. That's something to learn about as well too. Maybe I'll pick Maria's brain next week, right, and ask her, like, hey, like, what is it now that you know, right? Like, is it eye opening? I'll pick her brain. We'll see that. So again, it is yours truly, Dr. Barry Pierre, a concerned father of autistic children, a husband of an autistic wife who recognizes the importance of getting the services needed and recognizes the importance of having network connections and having, all of the barriers that are in front of you knocked down, because the outlook and the outcome could be so much greater if you're aggressive now, right? So again, we send our thoughts, we send our wishes to Tony Snell's family, and hope everything gets done. I'm gonna see you guys next week again. Make sure you check it out. Again, we will be with the CEO of Autism Black, Maria Davis Pierre.